Thank you for joining us today for our podcast on Making Connections, a handbook for effective formal mentoring programs in academia. I am really excited to be here today with the authors of Chapter 8, outlining the goals, objectives, and outcomes of the mentoring program. I'm here with Lisa Fain and Jamie Kreitz. I'm super excited to have this conversation today because one, I love talking about models, and two, I've been fortunate enough to have more than one occasion to have conversations with Lisa, and so I'm excited to reconnect with Lisa, who's the CEO of the Center for Mentoring Excellence and an expert in the intersection of cultural competency and mentoring. Lisa is also an executive coach and global speaker, and has been a longtime contributor to the University of New Mexico's Mentoring Institute Conference, where Lisa and I originally met, and the author of several books, and most recently co-authored Bridging Differences for Better Mentoring with Dr. Lois Zachary. And we are here with Jamie Kreitz, who is currently a people analytics coordinator at Weyerhaeuser, where she serves on multiple teams aimed at integrating mentoring throughout the organization. She was previously working with Lisa at the Center for Mentoring Excellence under the mentorship of Lisa. So it's great to have a mentor and mentee who are here to share with us both their experience, their expertise, and the deep, deep work that they have done in this area. Jamie's currently working on her PhD at Seattle Pacific University. So this is all really exciting, really relevant. So hello, Lisa and Jamie.
So good to be here, Tamara. Thanks for having us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So thank you both for being here. Tell me if you can share a little bit about what inspired you to do this work, to collaborate on this chapter together.
Yeah, I'll kick it off and then turn it over to Jamie for her thoughts. You know, one of the things that we do a lot at Center for Mentoring Excellence is we help clients create mentoring cultures. And, you know, there's lots of places, of course, we do training as well. There's lots of places where you can get great mentoring training. But one of the things that sets us apart is our philosophy that in order to have great mentoring training, you have to have a great mentoring culture. And so to have a great mentoring culture really starts from the basics. Starts from thinking about why do you want a mentoring program, which is really the first question that we ask every client when they come in and they say, hey, can you come in and do blah, blah, blah? We always say, what is it you want to achieve? And so this really started at its roots. Jamie, would you add anything to that?
I think that it's been great to work with Lisa on this chapter because I actually have experience working in academia as far as setting up mentors and mentees. So really getting to lean in and write a playbook really was something I needed to get done. And so it felt great to get an opportunity to write this with Lisa.
That's great. I love the idea of a playbook, right? As I've been having these conversations and reading through the book, I am constantly taking ferocious notes to really capture things that we can often overlook. So as you look at your chapter in its entirety, that focuses on really having clarity on your goals and your objectives and your outcomes, what do we want people to take away in terms of really understanding what the difference is between goals, objectives, and outcomes?
I'll take that one, Lisa.
Yeah.
So often when you dive into a mentoring program, you want to get into those initial things. You know, you want to get your pairs, you want to get them excited, but you don't think about the bigger picture necessarily. And in this chapter, our hope is to get you to zoom back out and think of what's the long-term goals that you have, and how does this relate to the mission of the program and the institution. That way it can be, again, embedded in the culture and you actually create a sustainable program.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know when I was speaking with Neil, the author of Chapter 5, we talked a lot about sustainability. And Lisa, from your experience, particularly working with organizations outside of academia, but when we also think about higher ed institutions, why is sustainability important?
Well, look, if you, without sustainability, you have a check the box. You have something that is just a one and done. And in many cases, it's just lunch, or it's just meetings, or it's just coffee, instead of it really being something that is about learning and development. Good mentoring is about two things. It's about learning and it's about the relationship. And if you don't have sustainability, you don't have both of those components, right? So a sustainable mentoring initiative is one that allows, empowers, and enables both the institution and the mentor and mentee to have the capability to develop good conversation that focuses on learning goals and also builds the relationship. And from an organizational standpoint, that builds the infrastructure, which is the stuff that we talk about in our chapter, to help enable and empower the participants to build that in a meaningful way.
That's great. So when I was speaking with Neelan, and as I was reading your chapter, a lot of that came up for me, because it is so often, right, that I'm sure you both have seen in your experience, that many times by the time someone might be reaching out for support, they're pretty far into their mentoring program. And so much about what you talk about is really that early stage work of looking at objectives, goals, and outcomes. So can you both talk a little bit about what the difference is between objectives, goals, and outcomes, and why it's so important to do those at the earliest stages of planning and preparation?
Jamie, you want to take that?
Yeah, as long as my dogs don't lose it. So you start with your objectives, which is your really broad picture. And you want this to be connected to the institution, also the program. We know that sometimes those things are a little bit different. So that objective is getting at the broad image. And then we can take it down a step further and talk more about, okay, here are the goals. And these are more behavior oriented. So we're starting to add some actionable steps into this layer. And then with your outcomes, you're going to add really, really specific steps. And that is also going to be connected to your goals, which is in turn connected to your objectives. Did you add anything, Lisa?
Yeah, I think exactly what you said. You may have flipped the words outcome and objective. So the outcome is the broad, why are we doing this program? The goals is the how do we achieve it? And then the objectives is what needs to happen to the goals. We just flipped our O words.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I one of the things as I was reading your chapter, I noted sort of this micro macro, right? That part of what we're setting out to do is about what happens between the mentor and mentee. But there's also this next level, I think, when we're looking at outcomes, right? Where we're looking at what are the larger goals of the organization and institution, right? And for program coordinators who are going into a needs assessment stage, then going into a planning stage, balancing those two things, what is the best way to balance those those outcomes and objectives?
Yeah, so let me set a little bit of context before I answer your question, which is that linking back to what you asked initially. When a program is underway and somebody gives us a call, they often say, so how do we measure success? Right? That's backwards, right? It's not how do you measure success, it's what are you trying to achieve? And Jamie had the brilliant idea in our chapter to come up with a story of a young woman named Tasha, which I think really helps everybody understand. Tasha is a program administrator who is tasked with the idea. Oh goodness, I'm having a blank. Jamie, what was the original task for her? Was it retention of students?
Yeah.
Yeah, who was tasked with a way to come up with retention of students and ultimately determined that a mentoring program was the way to achieve that outcome, right? And then worked our way down. Now, one of the things that I learned a lot from Jamie in this process, one of many, was how to use a logic model to get to that process. So I'll have Jamie explain logic models, but I think that might help tomorrow get to your question about how do you balance the outcomes and the objectives. Jamie, you want to tackle logic models?
Yeah, logic models is something that's used in academia quite a bit, and it's just a model because we like models of how you get from one place to another. So it's really adding that visualization piece to explain the whole process. So you have inputs, activities, outputs, and then your outcomes is out. We added as that last piece, and each step walks you through what you're going to be doing. And the purpose of that is to really communicate to everyone what the plan is and how you're going to get to that ultimate goal that you have.
Yeah, it's so true. And it helps you really think through who are the key stakeholders, what are the different variables, the things that could go wrong, that are likely to go wrong or likely to go right. And then it really helps you also break down outcomes into what's short-term, what's long-term, what's short-term, what's kind of medium term or this intermediate term, and what's long-term. And if you can go through the process of really identifying the inputs, the activities, the outputs, and the short, medium, and long-term outcomes, it helps you do a lot of the planning, get buy-in, and ensure that what you are programming into each of those elements will help you get to the outcomes that you're looking for.
I love that. One, your chapter is highly visual. So for all the visual learners out there, this chapter is going to be great because there's some great graphics and templates that really walk you through how to use these logic models and frameworks. But I do like the idea, right, around the short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes, because particularly, right, when we have stakeholders who are farther removed from the mentoring, they want both, right? They want to know, immediately, how is this having a return on the investment? And is it going to help us achieve our long-term goals, right? So if the goal for the organization is retaining students or retaining talent, that takes time, right? That might not be an immediate outcome. So by being able to say, well, an immediate outcome might be something that is gained in a specific mentoring relationship, and the long-term outcomes are what might be the overall impact of all of these mentoring relationships. I think that's really powerful. And do I have that right?
Jamie, you want to tackle?
Yeah, you do have that right. And I wanted to add on that the logic model, while it's written out as a very linear process, that doesn't mean as you approach it that it's going to be linear. I found that as I was talking through Tasha's story, it was pulling on different bits of yarn to untangle the ball, because I'd get to my intermediate outcomes and be like, oh, well, now I need to adjust my short-term outcome or my long-term outcome to make sure that they're all aligned. So you might start in the middle of the model, but that's okay. Eventually, you're going to get to that linear state, but it's going to take some iterations.
Yeah. One thought that came to my mind, Tamara, based on as Jamie was talking, is, as somebody who's not in academia, what I love is not the model itself, it's the power of the model in how it helps people like Tasha, the program administrator, not just set up the program, but communicate about the program, get buy-in for the program, figure out where the holes are along the way, how to increase support for the participants and the stakeholders, how to maximize results. It's the utility of the model and not just the model itself that I think is so powerful.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lisa. I think one of the aspects of this book that I am very drawn to is the extremely high level of support that it is offering to the program coordinator, right? We forget that program coordinators are often folks who have an entirely other role in the organization, right? There are very few people who's designated a mentor program coordinator and have experience in training. It's very often somebody who is passionate about their talent or their students, and they want more and better outcomes for them and see mentoring as a pathway, but may not necessarily know all the steps to the point that you made, Lisa, for communicating the vision, getting buy-in from those stakeholders, overseeing a needs assessment and putting these things into place. So I do love that idea that, if you don't start at the beginning, it's never too late to go back.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure.
So tell me about the 7 design elements that you all have put together really do walk people through those steps. But one of the things that you put in your chapter, that you said the best advice in mentoring is the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, that comes from an unlikely source. So the night before my wedding, my sister-in-law, was a woman of few words, gets up on the chair and says, "My words of advice for the couple are the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing." And you know what? That has proven to be great advice in marriage, but it's also great advice in mentoring. If, it's so easy to lose sight of the forest through the trees. And what is, again, what is the outcome that you're looking to achieve? What are the values and the goals of this program? Forget about the program. Let's start with what are the values and the goals of the institution and the organization, and then you can look at what are values and the goals of the program. Keeping that in mind is always a good idea. It helps steer towards true north, right? It helps metaphors here, but both of those things are really, really true, and it's essential in making sure that mentoring programs succeed.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I think that is part of what really contributes to a great mentoring relationship and a great mentoring program. So can you both share? So one, I want to say I love that your chapter offers this case study of Tasha and kind of walks us through her process. I think it does allow for us to better understand how to utilize and apply these models and the steps that they offer. And what do you see as the most powerful or the best impact really of utilizing one of these logic models and sort of following these steps? What are the best expected outcomes we could get from applying these logic models?
I think it helps you catch things that you might have missed if you're not leaning into the tools that are in this book. You have, as we talked about, a playbook, and these tools like the logic model, it's going to catch those little things that you might not have thought through. So maybe you've started the mentoring program even, and there's some things you might have missed. And so you can grab onto a logic model and start mapping out the pieces that you do have, and then you might catch things that you've missed. And I think that's a main component that is going to be the most helpful for the logic model. Another feature, of course, is that it gets the message out to everyone else, what you're doing, how you're going to get there. And that is ultimately going to help gain support for the mentoring program on the backside of things. So you can explain to your stakeholders, okay, here's where I want to go, and here's how I'm going to get there. And that often helps to garner support for like budgeting and things like that.
Yeah, It's exactly right. And the model, it can be prescriptive, diagnostic, grounding, all of those things. And it can help, so often when people think about, for those of us who work in the mentoring field, Tamara, you know this, Jamie, you know this, that mentoring can yield amazing results if it's done with intentionality and purpose. And, everything from greater retention of students, right? In this instance, to attracting students, to helping to advance students who are traditionally underrepresented or marginalized in academia, right? There's so many wonderful benefits of mentoring, and so many more. But in order to realize those outcomes, you really have to go through the process, and the logic models really help you do that.
Yeah. It was something that Neil and I talked about, with that needs assessment, that it is, starting with the end in mind. And as you shared, Lisa, it can be so important when we look to evaluate and measure the success of our programs, that we have used that needs assessment to bring us to this place of defining the outcomes and the goals and the objectives that inform the activities. So if I am a program coordinator who's come across this podcast and I am looking to get started, what is the best advice you have for me?
Don't start with the question what, start with the question why. How about you, Jamie?
Yes. I agree. I'm a program coordinator in the midst of pitching a mentoring program, and I'm thinking about what are the steps I'm doing, and immediately I started with the what, just like Lisa had said, and then I was like, wait, I wrote a chapter on this, and zoomed back out and remembered that why piece. So I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, I love that. Starting with the why. That's great. So, and too often, right, folks do start with the what. I think it's what you said at the top of our conversation with the what, like the mentors, the mentees. But if you do take those step back and start to think about your why and set these clear outcomes, because ultimately our stakeholders, the folks we need buy-in from, the folks we need support in terms of either budget or resources, that why is real important, and those outcomes are real important for those folks.
Yeah. One other thing that I would tell somebody who's looking to get started, which is don't try to do it alone. I have yet to see a program coordinator be successful when they try to launch it all by themselves and then let this thing set sail in any organization, whether it's academia, industry, NGOs, what have you, right? The role of a program coordinator or program administrator is to use the stakeholders and the resources that you have in order to get the results that you want to have. And that is something that is so often overlooked. So in addition to starting with the why, remembering that it's not yours to do alone, you help launch the ship, but a lot of people build it together.
Yeah. So tell me, to that vein, one of the questions as we think about what you all have put together, when it comes to a mentoring program, what do you think is a must-have?
Jamie, I'll start, and you can, knowing how you're going to measure success, right, is a must-have. Making sure that it's centered on learning is a must-have. Now, the learning can be towards different ends, but learning, measurement, and then links to the various stakeholders, right? Lifelines and links to the various stakeholders. A nice to have is always a committee or a mentoring team. I've seen successful mentoring programs that don't have them, as long as there's other ways to kind of liaise within the organization. That's my first answer. Jamie?
I think those are all very good. I think I'd add buy-in. So you need to have buy-in at all levels. So your stakeholders, also your mentees and mentors. So have a pool of mentors that really buy into what you're trying to do, and as well as your support team. Everyone needs to get in on the action and really embrace a mentoring culture. Otherwise, it's going to fizzle out over time. And like we talked about at the top of this, sustainability is what we're going for with these programs. And so having that buy-in is what's going to actually ensure that it lasts.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And Jamie, what would you say is a nice to have? Lisa mentioned a nice to have. What would you think is a nice to have? Not a must have, but a nice to have.
A nice to have. I think having an understanding of theory is a nice to have. You know, as if you're a program coordinator, you're not necessarily going to have the background in mentoring, but having some understanding of what mentoring is and how you can actually foster those relationships is definitely a bonus.
I love that. I've got another nice to have. I told you it was going to be my first answer. The mind keeps on working.
Yes.
Which is something, Tamara, that you and I have, which is connections within the mentoring community at large.
Mm.
You're not limited to the resources of your own organization. There are a lot of people who are doing this well. There are a lot of people who are doing it not well. You can learn from them too. But there are people like the two of you and I who are thinking about this stuff a lot, who, I don't know about you, I love to talk about this stuff. Right. And so continuing to reach out and learn from people outside of the organization, to get perspective, to get feedback, to get mentoring, dare I say, I think is a really nice to have.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Lisa. I think it's I am a couple of years ago, actually, I didn't think it was that long. A couple of years ago, I was on a panel discussion, business entrepreneurship, and I was talking about mentoring. Somebody on the panel said, well, there isn't any research about mentoring. It's just a thing we do. And I was like, oh.
Right. Oh, really?
Like, that's not true. But I think, right, it's one of those things that for people who are very far removed from what we know and what we do, mentoring just seems like this thing we all know what it is and we know how to do. But in fact, there are, all of those who've contributed to the book and all of us here who have really taken a very deep look at what mentoring is and all the things it can mean and all the ways in which it can be effective and all the ways in which it can be facilitated and happen. And I think that is so powerful, Lisa, in terms of, for people who might be feeling alone, might be feeling like, I thought I was supposed to know what this is, but it's more complicated. It is more complicated.
Yeah.
I'll just add on something to tie it back to logic models, honestly. I had a psychology professor that said that a lot of what we do is very squishy, and that's things that people don't want to tread into because it's difficult. And so part of the logic model actually is to draw some concrete things, some concrete objectives to something that is much more squishy. So we can actually add some understanding there by using that.
Yeah, I love that, right? And that does contribute, right, to ultimately what it takes very often to get buy-in is to explain this squishy thing that's, humans and how we manage them and how we support them and upskill them and ensure they're having, great experiences in our institution. There are ways in which we can measure that and qualify it in numbers, and I love that. So tell me, for the two of you, what can we live without in a mentoring program?
Oh, what can we live without? Why is this a harder question than what we need to live with, right? What can we live without? We can live without all the fancy stuff, right? I mean, look, I actually am I'm a growing believer in the importance of technology and mentoring when you're trying to do mentoring at scale. That's really helpful. But sometimes we over rely on the technology and we forget about the human interaction. So I'm not answering your question directly, Tamara, but I think again, keeping the main thing. All the other stuff is a nice to have. Sometimes it's superfluous to worry too much about, are we having this gathering or that gathering? I love gatherings, actually thrive on gatherings, and it's important. But the most important thing is to have that underlying tie-in to the outcome. Again, my first answer. Jamie.
But I love that, right? We can get very caught up in not having all the bells and whistles, and if we don't have all the bells and whistles, then can we do it? And if we're not using, the latest and greatest software, how do we make this happen? And if we get too caught up in those things, we could take our eyes off what the main thing is. So
yeah,
I love that.
We can live without the perfectionism of it too, right? Like very often, look, if you've done some of the work and you've gone through the logic model or through the 7 elements of a design or what have you, and ship it, as Seth Godin says, sometimes you just got to ship it and you've got to repair fix it as you go along. So I would say my second answer is better than my first answer, which is the perfectionism of feeling like we have to launch it when all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed. Jamie, what would you add?
I think it's similar to your first answer, but I don't think you need to overstructure a formal mentoring program. So you're not going to run the entire show and say you need to meet 3 times a month for the next 6 months. You can leave some flexibility in there and provide some autonomy for your mentors and mentees. And that's actually going to be better than if you over-engineered a program.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, because I think people can get overwhelmed by all the moving pieces. If folks have got that buy-in, they can feel like a lot is riding on them getting it right. And sometimes getting it right doesn't mean doing it perfectly. So I think that is really great insights for folks who are listening, and hopefully will be coming back and reading through the chapter, because I think you both have provided such clarity on how we start with the end in mind and setting up those objectives and the goals and the outcomes. I love that model. In addition to providing those 7 design elements that really walk people through that playbook, as you have said several times, Jamie, that I think really is going to support people in their process of planning and preparing and really implementing a program. So I'm going to wrap up our conversation. But before I do, is there anything else you both would like to share with our audience before we go?
Just that we're really honored to be a part of this edition, Making Connections. There's some amazing, esteemed colleagues in the mentoring field who have written some of these other chapters. We're really excited to read all the other chapters and just thrilled to be a part of it. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank
Yes.
you.
I'm so glad I got to be a part of this and write it with Lisa. I think one thing that's amazing about the mentoring field is it's such a supportive community. You end up being mentored by mentoring experts. And so there's something really special about that. It's magical. And you can really lean in this community and find support anywhere.
Thank you both for that. I do. I think it's phenomenal. I find this initiative so exciting that there are so many, as you said, Lisa, so many really important scholars who are being so thoughtful about mentoring and mentoring programs that are going to help all of us be better and do better as we advance mentoring in our organizations and institutions. So thank you both for your contributions to the book, such a thoughtful and engaging and interactive chapter that provides some real life models and applications for putting this into practice for program coordinators in any institution, higher ed or otherwise. Thank you both so much for your time today. We look forward to the rest of you reading and enjoying their chapter. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.